All right. Thank you, everybody, for being here. If you don't know who we are, I am your hostess with mostest, Valerie Willis, I want to say infamous, um, fantasy author, romance, paranormal, cryptid, chaos novelist. And with me today is.
I am Jen Paquette, and I write cheesy vampire romance with some angles happy ending.
When you say JN real fast, it almost comes out like Jen in my ears for some reason. You're like,
Jen, but it's JM.
oh, I see. That's what happened. You said Jen. I'm thinking JM, and then it made Jen.
Yes, yeah, fine.
Today, we're covering some quick tips on plots. It's pretty cut and dry this time around, but I figured, had this idea. Jen says, let's do this. So here we are. We're going to talk about what is a plot and how to identify it in different ways to kind of identify it. We're going to talk about types of writers and how that impacts your plotting. And then we're going to, so you hear this term all the time. People are like, well, your plot's made out of story beats, and no one ever explains what a story beat is. So we're going to explain what a story beat is and how that plays into your genre and impacts how you plot your book.
So, Jake, those who have an accountability planner, this is the February theme is plot, which is sort of where we're going along with the planner. So plot. Plot is how you get from A to B. It's the answer to the question, what happens in that story. So, but this is the official, if you want to get into it, it's the sequence of events, right? Like, this happened, works.
Turning point.
Yeah.
Sometimes plot is broken into sort of 3 stages of acts. Act 1, 2, and 3, you hear that all the time. You have your beginning, your end, and your rise of action, and then your climax that tips into the end. There's different ways people sort of break that rhythm down.
And one thing to keep in mind is different readers will expect different moments. Like American readers, we are used to having a resolution at the end. We want to know who did it. We want to know how it ends. Other parts of the world do not do that. They think that's stupid. Like you give them big reveal, let the audience figure it out. So just be aware that different audiences, when it comes to plot, we have a certain expectation as Americans that is definitely not universal.
And speaking of expectations, your plot is basically like, if you ever want to write down your plot, it should be basically your elevator pitch, right? Like when people ask me what The Princess Bracelet is about, I give them my one-liner elevator pitch plot line, which is, hey, this is about a runaway vampire prince who falls in love with a human priest, and now they're trying to stop a 100-year civil war. Done. Right? That's all they need to know. They know who the main character is, who the love interest is. They know there is a romance involved, and that together they're trying to solve this bigger world plot. If you want great practice at plots, a great fun activity, or just take a look at it, is look at plots explained badly or explain a film plot badly. These are hashtags that you can find across all the different social medias. I know it was all the rage on Twitter at one time. But for example, this Batman one, which I love, is a billionaire devotes his fortune to cosplay and beating up mentally ill people. Holy crap. It's not wrong. And that's another thing, right? Know that there's more than one way to explain your plot, and each way has a different tone.
My favorite is Single Father tries to end world hunger with the Raw collection. Is that true? It's true from a certain perspective.
Does anyone want to give a stab at re-explaining the Finding Nemo plotline? Can't see the audience. It's my thing is too small. And you guys can type it in the chat. You can think you can raise a hand or ask to speak. And we can pull you up. If no one's going to participate, it's fine. It's fine because I put in. Oh, wait. Lyra's going to give it a go. She's got kids. I know she's seen this one maybe more than once.
So
I'm like,
just keep swimming.
I mean, Harry Potter knows this guy has an unhealthy obsession with a teenage boy. This Anakin one, a moody teen teams up with an old man and destroys a religious cult. I mean, it's like you can see that that's technically plot, or the premise of the entire scope from start to end.
You're going to describe your book differently depending on who you're talking to. Like if you're talking to someone who wants romance, you're going to emphasize the romance. If you're talking to someone who's like, I want an action book, you're going to emphasize all the elements that are active. So
this is great.
Yes, helicopter dad loses his only son, goes on a perilous journey to find him, meeting all sorts of crazy personalities along the way.
Yes. And then, and then there's this one. Man abducts a woman with Alzheimer's and puts her through trauma in order to find his son, who is also abducted, right? There is always more than one way to see. It's learning, one, which elevator pitch of that plot is the most enticing that gets the reader the information they want, right? So in the case of Finding Nemo, if you were selling this to a kid, like, the son gets, kidnapped, and it's about the dad learning that there's a bigger world while rescuing Nemo himself, who always wanted to try, right? You can do a spin that sells the story to the reader, intended audience. So it's always a good idea to kind of like write down that one-liner as you're even drafting your story, so you can remember what your focus, what your selling point is. So, types of writer.
So basically there are 3 types. I'm sure you've heard these before: the pantser, the plotter, and then the in-betweener is the plancer. So I am a solid pantser because you're like, what plot? You're like, wait, you do things before you start writing. This is the person who just sits down and starts writing. You might have a rough idea in mind, like tone, concept, character, world, but the individual events or the idea of outlining is usually like, am I doing that? When they're like, I think my character's like, I think this is how my story's going to go. And then the characters are like, no, we're going to have a sandwich. So, things go sideways. You will find a pantser who will apply story beats after they have a draft just to make sure that they've done it, but they don't really think about it beforehand. The opposite is going to be your plotter. That's the person who maps out everything. They have chapter by chapter layouts. They have a huge outline, character profiles. They probably have a very well organized world building guide that lists all of the things. Like Sal has an entire wiki devoted to.
Hey, no, I'm a planter. That wiki has developed as I've written. It grows with each book and each chapter. So that would be sort of the in between. A planter kind of has loose bullet points or like things like a checklist almost. They don't have it. So a great example is Christine, who writes the Gilded series, which is sort of like a Korean mythology inspired thing. She literally has a wall that she keeps empty in her office, and she plots out with different colored sticky notes on the wall and practically writes the book in sticky notes before fleshing it out all the way. So plotter literally will finish the story before finishing the writing, which is intense. I can't. I don't know where the story is going. The characters are telling me shit's happening, and now I have to follow them and report it like a news reporter. Like, I know how this is going to end because I have an idea of where I want to stop the story. A lot of times I know where my climax is going to be and things like that. But how they get between those points, I might assume it takes a chapter. And when I get there, I'm 5 chapters deep and we haven't even gotten there yet. Like, I was just telling Jen the other day, writing the paranormal rom-com that I'm working on. I'm like, I thought they would have banged by chapter 30. They have not.
Oh, no, news.
Oh, no.
I wrote the chat. I'm a planter. I would get nothing done if I had to map everything out. I understand. Same. Like, I just want to sit down and write. If I have to sit down and plot, like, I could be writing right now.
And a lot of points, they just plot enough that if they do get stuck or hung up, they keep going back to their notes a little bit. Plotter, totally dependent. And if they lose a sticky note, they usually lose it. So I've seen it. Pantser's like, oh, I haven't hit the five senses. Let me like work on that a little. They're more worried about the pros and making sure they hit those points a lot more often. Now, do I shift between these depending on what I'm doing? Absolutely. I'm probably a heavier plotter for nonfiction, whereas my short stories, 10K and under, a lot of times I just pants. I have a character and I have a what if and I just hit the ground running. So don't think that you're going to just fall under one of these. Each story and each story type and thing that you work on, you may find that you're more proactive in one type over the other, depending what you're working on. Even genre can shift which one you follow. Oh, a great question. What is a story beat? I kind of like the description to this because it emphasizes it doesn't have to be a grand gesture in the book, right? Story beat is anything, any moment that you write that changes something in the tone, the intent of action or plot, or even impacts the character development or plot progression. Right? I like how this breaks it down a little bit. It doesn't have to take up a whole chapter. It can literally be a one-line moment that breaks everything. And we've experienced that in a lot of books we've read, right? Like that moment in Lord of the Rings when Gandalf falls off the thing. That's a story beat. That's the crisis, right? They lost the wizard. The only thing keeping them alive up until now, right? The only thing who knows what the hell we're doing, who's been leading them is I Christ on.
But also, people are like, this is the time when the Fellowship finally finds its feet because Gandalf is such a great leader.
Yeah, no.
Look at all this. I mean, he's good at certain things. He's just not great at other things. I mean, in The Hobbit, he's like, we're trapped up in trees and cornered by wolves. You know what we should do? Set our trees on. Is a terrible leader. But anyway, yeah, I love this moment where you just have a tiny shift and then you're like, well, yeah, all right, now I know where it's going, or have a direction.
A lot of times it'll confirm a suspicion a reader has. Sometimes it'll break a trope, but it's just that one line that's like, and then he done, and you're like, and then almost, and if you do a story beat correctly, your reader almost has to put the book down and really process what just shifted hard, right, left, or where up and down, right?
But I don't know if you read Angela's Ashes. It's a memoir, but there's a moment where he's got all these brothers, and so it's a true story. And they're like, we took really good care of him. He has a small twin brother, or twins, and he's like, but he died anyway. And you're like, wait, what? Like, another one of your siblings died? Come on.
Yeah, it's rough. So when you write in a genre, I don't know if you guys have ever took a moment to kind of research this. And there's a book that I just picked up. Now I gotta find it. It's like the anatomy of both beats, anatomy of genres. Yeah. There we go. I knew I had it someplace. I put my book away for once. So the anatomy of genres, how to form and explain stories by John Truby is a great one that shows a bunch of story beats and references a lot of movies and television series and books within it. So you kind of get an aspect of more familiar with them. But every genre has a beat sheet, and that beat sheet is inspired by the audience and their expectation. So when we start doing genre writing, we're actually making our writing a little harder for ourselves because now we have to acknowledge our reader expectations and assumptions and make sure we are checking those checkboxes. We have added extra checkboxes on top of checkboxes. is what happens.
As a sir, I have these in the back of my mind always because I'm a reader. So I read romance, I read fantasy, so that I know what the readers are going to expect. But I wait until the book is done, and that's when I go back and I'm like, oh, did I do these things? When did I do them? Do I need to like move a scene or add a scene or whatever to make it flow a little bit better plot wise?
I always recommend for anyone doing romance or including romance, also pick up a book called Romancing the Beat by Gwen. I can never remember her last name. Because the way she breaks it down and explains it and her writing in that book is just very, it clicks. It clicks very easily for a majority of people who I don't think I've ever heard anyone come back and say, this doesn't make any sense. You also see them talk about this in the Save the Cat, right? They said if you're going to have a really big a-hole of a main character or a dislikable main character, you need to give them a Save the Cat moment. Well, that's a type of story beat, right? That is where you have taken a moment or one line and you shift your reader. And I think that's the one missed mark on this description of story beat, or people don't discuss with story beat, that the story beat also can be where you shift a reader's understanding of a tone, a character, or the plot, or the book, right? It's not just inward, it kind of resonates both ways. Sometimes it's more inward, sometimes it's more external, sometimes it's hitting both. So for romance and fantasy, these are very loose story beats. Like, especially if you like scary movies, a lot of these, as you read these story beats and think about some of your favorite movies or movies that you know by heart, you're like, the world is not what it seems. Man, every time like the first 15 minutes, not even that, first 10 minutes of any horror movie always does that, right? You always like, oh, it's a sunshine, little small neighborhood. Oh God, there's a dead woman on the dock. Like, that's that moment, right? And then they introduce your characters, right? Whereas romance and fantasy, they share something in common. And this is where overlapping and doing multiple genres, you start connecting the dots of which of these beats are the same. So instead of introducing the characters as a second beat, they introduce that as the first beat, right? You need to know who we're following and who they're falling in love with should be introduced, even though they may not like each other in the first 3 chapters. They have to cross paths in the first 3 chapters. So Jen read Blood and Ash by Jennifer Armentrout. And she's like, oh man, she's like, it's fantasy, but it's romance. She says, but I don't think she's hitting the romance beats. And I said, did they put her with the love interest that she ends up with in the first 3 chapters? And she goes, well, there's a saucy scene. Is it in the first 3 chapters? Absolutely is in the first 3 chapters.
And it's not a spoiler because you don't know out of all the people that she encounters which one she's going to end up with. But going back, once you do know who she ends up with, you're like, there's the odds being put there. There was a scene.
So here's
we got a question. Wait. If you're writing a series, can your beats space out over the whole series, or should you get each one within each book in some way, shape, or form? This is the Tolkien question. All right, so if you're writing a series, you have it, and Harry Potter has the same issue. You can have your hero have the individual journey in each book, and then you kind of bounce, and each book follows the same beats, or you can spread them out. It just depends on how you want to do it. I mean, Val, do you have a preference for one or the other? I like both, depending. If it's a slower book, I want it kind of spread out over the whole thing. If a lot of stuff happens, I kind of expect arc in book 1, a new arc in book 2.
In fact, one of the things that I'm adding to my writing a novel 101 is writing series. And I think the biggest miscommunication and there's really no one who talks about this, is that so a Cedric series is the best example I have, is what I wrote, right? And people are like, oh, how many books do you think this is going to be? I'm like, well, I'm guessing 12 books for the first series arc. Okay. The easiest way to know what I'm talking about is look at TV series where each season seems to shift. American Horror Stories are great. They have a different theme for every season, so it's a little more louder. So you have a series arc that has its own set of beats, But each, as Jen said, each individual book, you should know if it's favoring more fantasy or romance. So Blood and Ash series by Jennifer Armentrout, we have a fantasy romance, right? And we talked about the fact that in that first book, where you think it would end for fantasy, it continues for almost 10 chapters beyond that because they didn't finish putting the romance beats in. Okay. And until they have satisfied both beats for both genres, she doesn't end that book. That's why they're so chunky, because she checks every box. Do you need to check every box? Not necessarily. Every author's blend of those things and what they leave out of one genre versus the other, and which one they're leaning into for each part of the series will shift depending on what your series arc requires of you.
And so specifically with that book, what was interesting as someone who reads both fantasy and romance, the fantasy reader in me was like, why is this book still going? I was excited because I was like, ooh, it's like bonus material. I get to get more where normally the story would have ended here. But the romance reader in me was like, we would have been you said it. Frankly, extra. Like, I was excited, but the fantasy reader who's reading your romantasy for the fantasy side will be like, I'm bored. This, like, we're done. I don't know why I'm still here. So it just depends on what your readers are more interested in.
Yeah. So I see by now. So you may type in questions. I love it. I do want to point out between these three, all three of them have a crisis as the darkest hour and a crisis is pretty standard in most writing because you have to build that suspense of things shifting or realization or coming down to earth or questioning everything that's come to pass. All of those sort of lumped together into a thing. And you'll see that a lot of these story beats also will help with your foreshadowing, with your reader immersion, and things like that.
Well, one thing, just if you study literature, Freytag's formula for fiction, we have the terms crisis and climax, and they mean different things. Specific, like a crisis is the most emotional moment in your story, and people can argue about where that is. So, if you're reading Lord of the Rings, some people were like, the most emotional moment was when they were escaping from the Black Riders and they had to get on Buckleberry Ferry. Like, I was very emotionally invested at that point. And other people are like, how can you say that? Gandalf dying is, of course, the most emotional moment. And then others will be like, well, I thought it was when, Frodo got stabbed and everybody thought he was dead for a minute. That was the most emotional. So when it comes to crisis, that's something that people are always going to debate. Climax is the most important moment for the story, for the plot. Like, what is the thing that had to happen to get your characters to the end of the book? Yeah, most of the most part, people can agree on climax. What did Amanda? Oh, Amanda said, definitely would like to see the tips for series beats because I have the same issue. Erica keeps asking how many more books in the Life After series. My answer is, I don't know. It's complicated.
It's almost the same process of when I plot out a book. I sit down and I do bullet points. I'm like, okay, I don't think of them as books yet. I just think of, okay, I have this big arcing story that's going to be multiple books. Let's just take that thought out of this arcing story that's going to be thousands of words. What do I want to achieve? And then how long do I think I need on each of those points? And you're going to be a rough estimate. Like, for example, I was telling Jen that I thought the boys getting on the boat, being in Terrorheim and leaving to the Scarlet Isles was just going to be a one book thing. And then once I started plotting the actual book out, and I go, oh no, these are 2 books. My five book saga is now a 7 book saga. If this goes the way I think it's going to go, which means I have to rethink this other scene later that I know is coming, this other aspect of the journey, because I realize after experiencing that. So a lot of times it's still exploratory, it's still a wild guess, where a plotter can probably tell you exactly how many books they have in a series because they have practically halfway written the series all the way through on some. So that's where the difference is. And it's okay if it's more books than what you suspected, because all that says is that you've learned enough about storytelling and know your writing and storytelling that you know you need to spend more time to develop something to make sure that the stakes are high enough and the emotional drive is in the right place for the next book or installment or scene or leg of the race kind of scenario.
So even the opposite is also true. If you thought you were writing a trilogy, but you're done, you're like in the middle of book 2 and you're like, you know what? I kind of feel like I've covered it. The story is done. Don't feel like you have to drag it out. Like you're not obligated to write more books in that story if the story is already done.
Yeah, duologies are very common these days too. So, what about subgenres? What about tone? How does that come into play? What about tropes? Do tropes impact genres? These are some charts that you can find. And of course, I kind of stuck to the fantasy romance horror beat a little bit, but you can find ones for individual stuff. I encourage you to explore your beat sheets for the different genres you write in. Try to identify them in your favorite works. Try to identify them in your own work, because you'll be surprised that you were already probably implementing a lot of this, because strong writers naturally fall in line with a lot of this. Know that there are alignments in tone and tropes that we can pull from that are already established to make our life a little easier. And even these sometimes have expectation and story beats tied to them. So like Friends the Lover, well, we're going to have to show some cutesy little childhood scenes when the mirror throwing up. We're Enemies the Lover, we're going to have to make them fight each other a couple of times or step on each other's toes, or so each one's going to require different types of scene building and different types of story beats within that genre. Fake relationship, they're going to have to, betrayal might be them breaking it off because this was fake anyway, and that's the hurt scene, where other times it's not. Where, for example, I was just having, because I always have to pull out this chart for the grim. I'm like, Princess Beast is a grim bright. It's like almost I have to pull my teeth to remember. But knowing in your fantasy and science fiction, knowing the difference between grim, dark, noble, and bright can really help you pigeonhole who your competition is and how you should be writing and telling your story beats and what story beats matter the most, right? So I'm a grim bright, which means the world is in shambles, but there's hope at the end of the tunnel, and that the characters are strong enough to push that. The world has not been in a peaceful time long enough to create weak men, hearsay, but so there's all these cool things. Like Lord of the
I always said Lord of the Rings is noble dark, but I always say if I'm one of those, like if you could get sucked into the world of a book, you want noble bright because you got a shot of surviving in a noble bright. A noble dark, yeah, I mean you'll go out with a bang, but the world is still
really love to have tea with talking beavers.
Right, exactly. But even there, I mean, you have your challenges, so.
And even more, so I think the zombies should be flipped. I think virus should be under monsters and undead under paranormal, in my opinion. That seems sort of split.
Yeah, but it depends on what zombies you have.
Right. But I love that even in a horror genre, like you're like, oh, it's, and then you look at this and you're like, oh, right. Like how a paranormal horror story unfolds against a psychological, or even the subgenres of comedy and stuff like that. It's very different what story beats they're putting the most emphasis and putting up front. So, I just wanted to kind of share this sort of aspect of thoughts, because I think a lot of what these quick tips and ideas and concepts and understandings will do is give you an easier time of recognizing and identifying parts of your plot or your current plots or even past and future plots, and give you a sort of way of directing your aim and things like that. So I guess we're here now, right? We're here. We're at questions.
Made it all the way through. think about your story and what people will expect. And then
Well,
who has questions? Do I see people are talking?
I know, I'm excited.
Excited. Oh, Lyra says, I haven't done yet. Something I haven't done yet is a haunted house. Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool genre.
I think my favorite thing about, because I've had this discussion before about a horror, or haunted house horror piece, is that the house becomes a character, like an inanimate object is now a character or player in it that is opposing those who are inside it. It's a very interesting. And then when you take that aspect and then you realize that's not a far hop from body horror or parasitic body horror, and you're like, oh no.
Well, it's the one of those, because whenever you're doing conflicts, you have like man versus man, fighting other people, man versus self. That would be the body horror. Man versus nature, and man versus environment, or man versus gods is usually the other one. But the haunted house would be man versus environment, or anything. I mean, if the environment's trying to kill you, that's fighting the environment. What do we get? Book 4 digs into the haunted forest and the haunted environment. Yeah. So anytime you have, and often in romance novels, that's how your characters, your enemies, get to become lovers, is because they're both fighting together against the environment.
Yep. Or opposing.
Oh yes, Hill House is the classic one. Good stuff.
Love it. 13 Ghosts is a good time too. They're forced in a glass house in an environment.
The Dark Tower series has a haunted house.
Yeah,
featured for a little while. It ends up being a portal to another world, but you have to survive to get through it.
And 13 Ghosts is fun because you can really see the story beats. So it's almost like the hallmark of horror in a way, right? We know it. It's a feel-good horror piece. You're gonna hit all the story beats and things like that. That's why Hallmark works so well. They are so. That's a great example. Is the sweet romance genre on Hallmark romances double down hard and use the story beats religiously that it becomes a form writing. And if you're trying to develop a formula for the novels you write or how you write, starting with decoding your tropes, your subgenres, your reader expectations, and your story beats can get you there faster than anything else. It would just take, a good hour of sitting down and just like, okay, these are the story beats and tropes I favor. How do I implement them? How can I continue to implement them in future writing? Because this seems to work for both me and my readers. So always take a time to kind of look back. Like I said, I thought that book three of Princess Priest's Trayvon Family Saga was going to be just a one book thing. And then I realized, no, there's too much to unpack with character development. And I have to shift my main character and my readers' expectations before they step foot on this boat. I need them to think this way before that step, before that scene, before that art series arc point. So what story beats, what adventure do I need to solve that? So,
yeah. I just want to say in the chat, Amanda mentioned The Legend of Hell House by Richard Matheson is a good depiction, but of the house being a character. But Richard Matheson is the guy who wrote I Am Vampire, and Stephen King read that. Not I Am Vampire, I Am Legend, where they're all like they're ripped. But Stephen King read that as a teenager. And there's a scene in it where he basically kills a vampire in a grocery store. And for him, he was like, that was the most fascinating thing I've ever read, to think that you could have this supernatural element in the most common location. And it blew his mind. And then he was like, you know what? I could take like an ordinary place and I could make it scary. I could do a horrible thing to people in the most common place, where everybody can relate to it. So I always thought that was interesting. So you're using the environment. Not like the environment isn't bad. Everybody recognizes it. You've all been alone on a staircase. You've all been alone looking in a mirror in a bathroom. Like, he takes those moments and turns them into something supernatural.
That's a point I make when people ask me, how do you up your reader immersion? I'm like, put the character someplace or in a situation that we've all felt, and then start breaking it in one way or the other. For instance, a lot of my erotica starts with a knocking on a door. Is a very common short story starter, or sitting in a classroom, or on the phone with their friends arguing. Like we know exactly how it feels and connects us, and then you start decoding, breaking it down.
You don't want to start with someone waking up from a dream. That's
We don't care about them showering or their hygiene routine, not yet anyway.
unless
Unless it's bottom or
very bad. Um, we have another.
She's like, what was the other Shirley Jackson series that was related to that?
I don't know if that is series, but she wrote the lottery. Speaking of small town horror, even though it's not, it doesn't seem like horror at first. It seems perfectly innocent, and then you realize what's happening, and it's not great to win the lottery.
Well, even unreliable narrator, what is it? The Gone Girl is a good example too of how you can break expectations but still hit all the story beats.
And
so
and you have to in order too. You can kind of play around with things. The more traditional expectation, like the readers who are like, no, I need it to follow this beat. They're not going to love it, but the people who are maybe a little bored with it will appreciate it more. So, the turn of the screw was that wasn't Shirley Jackson. That was it. Wasn't that oh my God, my English degree is failing me right now. Henry James. There it is. Thank you. Yeah, Turn of the Screw is another one. I'll be honest, it's probably not. I shouldn't say it, but yeah, I didn't enjoy the turning of the screw. I thought it was way too slow. For me personally, I was like, oh, I'm tired of that. I know that it's supposed to be like tiny increments of terror, but I was over it. I was like, let me just find out what happens at the end. I'm good. Yeah. But if you like very slow, painfully slow short stories, then the turning of the screw is good.
I think that's what the title is, the turn of the screw. It's just a slow process.
Yeah. That's the idea. It's like it's a gothic house, and there's these kids that the person is taking over, and then you don't know, like, are the kids dead? Ooh.
The Schrodinger's cat scenario. Sorry.
But so it has that. It's Jane Eyre, but not,
No. But yeah, I know. I just, when the theme of this month was plot, I wanted to at least like bring up like what is a plot. Like, remember, it's your elevator pitch. It's how you want your audience to perceive that story. And that's why, looking at film plots explained badly is a great, like, stimulating thing to look at, because you want to know. And usually there's formulas out there for elevator pitches, which is all it is identifying your is what you're really doing. You're always labeling the main character. If there's a love interest, they get kind of included or tossed in there somehow. And then the main goal, conflict, goal, and motivation, right? So in that case, in the case of my one-liner of the vampire prince falls in love with a human priest, we know that the two motivators is, one, they're in love, and the other motivator, I clarify, is they're trying to change their world, right? If you're good enough and you have several genres, you should be able to kind of sneak in some way, somehow, because you guys are beautiful writers. Those dualities.
I also want to say, because sometimes people are like, well, I don't, what am I going to say that's new? My story just follows the same plot. Like, why should I bother? There's, the story's already been told. It's like, yeah, but you've never told it. So even if you're retelling Beauty and the Beast, there's a reason why we like that story, and you can retell it 100 times, and it will be different every time.
I mean, that's what Shifter wrote. Plus, that's what Mom follows it.
All the same, but you're doing it differently, and you're allowed to do it, your way with your voice. So just because the story is familiar doesn't mean it's bad. You don't always have to break all the rules and do something different. People like expectations. They like familiarity.
That's cool if they want. Saying it's X-File meets Ghost Adventures, but from the ghost's perspective, that is your comparison pitch.
It's good stuff.
It's still a pitch, and it's a very important type of pitch. You should have that type of pitch on hand. So when people ask me my comparative pitch, or I feel like a comparative pitch might work better based off of who I'm encountering and where I'm at, I tell them this is C.S. Paquette's The Captive Prince trilogy, but without social inclinations and everything a dark fantasy romance has, but just with two guys falling in love, right? I want them to know that this is very in line with LGBT that they read, that is commonly read, but without either the toxic relationship or without the fact that I don't put any, how dare two guys love each other aspects, and I drives me crazy. They're two very masculine guys. Sometimes I pitch that too, but it's.
But make your X-Files meets Ghost Adventures from the ghost perspective, that's going to sell the book to people. Like, you don't necessarily have to get into, the ghost is a female, detective who is going to continue solving crimes in the after. Like, you could do that for certain people, but a lot of people will see, X-Files, Ghost Adventures, but from the ghost perspective and be like, oh, I'm all in. So there's nothing wrong with it. One.
No. And that's what I was saying. It's a maybe this. You know what? Where's my sticky notes? I'm going to write a note to myself to add a types of pitches section in my novel, because pitches can also help you write. Yeah. Stuff. Yeah, Robbie wrote, Tyler Perry does it all the time. Look for
the retelling of common plots, right? Isn't that what we were talking?
Yep. Cinderella has been in the top 10 nonstop when you really look at those stories, especially for romance.
Yeah, we love those. Well, I mean, that's a type, right? The male Cinderella.
And like you said, Beauty and the Beast is entire genres now. Mafia romance is just a Beauty and the Beast story. Or he's a monster. Not literally this time.
But not with her.
But not with her. And he will kill everyone. Yeah, the beast.
That's one of the trope. When you do trope bingo, that's one of.
Yeah, it's good. It's good times. Well, I hope this helped everyone. I hope it kind of opened up some doors, got some ideas flowing. That's the whole idea of these quick let's talk about a topic. If you want a little deeper dive or more on this level, I know the author's accountability planner and the author's writing prompt book. I can't remember the exact title yet.
Yeah. Writing process. Really accountable.
Yeah. I'm gonna come on. We gotta wake up. Not enough coffee this morning. But thank you guys so much. And for those just watching from the other industry, don't hesitate to reach out to us and ask more questions. Come find us at the Discord Accountable Authors Discord channel. We are here whenever you need. I have been Valerie Willis, the fantasy author. You can find my books at willisauthor.com, and my co-host has been
J.M. Paquette, and I write fantasy, romance, love triangles, happy endings, and you can find me at authorjmpaquette.com.
Woo! And that's a